Welcome to the August plan with me. You were probably wondering if I was going to post a video at all, but I was just racked with indecision. I would make a decision about a theme for the month, I would be excited about it, and then I would not be. And then I would come up with another theme that I was excited about, and then not be. And then I got as far as being on camera, making mock-ups and ready to tape, doing a few pre-sketches, and making the decision right then and there that we were going to do something else this month. It was at this moment that I started thinking about a misplaced pin. And when I say pin, I just mean something that I had placed on a Pinterest board, and I actually randomly placed it in the wrong place and ended up being inspired to head to Michael's to pick up some items to create this month's bullet journal theme. So my August theme is based on a 2018 spring haute couture piece from Schiaparelli that transfixed me when I first saw it, and having it misplaced was just sort of sitting at the back of my mind. Not so much as a bullet journal theme, because how do you turn like a capelet, which is kind of what it was, like this cape over a dress, into a theme. And so what you're seeing here is me working through how I'm translating this cape with this beautiful sort of avant-garde graphic embroidery on it into a bullet journal theme. Am I going to take it literally? Am I going to use it figuratively? What am I going to do? I decided to go fully literal. I decided to lean into the theme and try to do some embroidery in my bullet journal. Now, I knew I wasn't going to be able to embroider in the journal. I was going to have to put a page in, just because I was going to need to be able to maneuver the page in a way that I didn't think was going to really work with it attached to the journal. So we went on an adventure, and here we go. You don't see much of this process when I'm normally setting up spreads, because I have already pre-drawn everything. You are really seeing what the process is like. There's lots of erasing and fixing and going back and adjustments that happen in the course of creating what ends up on YouTube. Much of that doesn't get seen because it takes so much time. This video this month is going to be highly sped up. It's sped up most months, but this month in particular, we are going at warp speed because there's so much happening in the video that doesn't normally happen when I set up a bullet journal spread. I also didn't have much sort of practice. I did have some thread around, so I did a little bit of a test before I left, but I wanted something with a bit more sheen, so I went to Michael's, picked up some very silky embroidery thread. It ended up being problematic to get into the needles. Even though I had purchased embroidery needles, I wanted them to be small because I didn't want massive holes in the paper, because we're not working with fabric here. Once the hole goes through, it stays. It isn't something that's gonna, the needle's gonna go through and the fabric is gonna go back to where it was. So there was lots of things to consider. I also did this on cardstock initially, but decided that I wanted the paper, this is just some paper I had here at home, to have much more of a, I guess you would call it, wanted it to look luxe, like the piece. So I glued that over the cardstock, which actually made the paper much stiffer, and this process of embroidering really difficult. This silky thread just wasn't as precise as the other thread, which is why I went back in and with the Tombow and colored in the red, so if there were spaces, that at the very least there would be red behind it, so you'd get the appearance of something that was well embroidered. I am not an haute couture seamstress. I'm not a seamstress at all, though I sew a little bit, but not I'm not making my own clothes, we'll say that. If we're honest, I'm not even altering my own clothes. If we get real honest, I still send my clothes to the cleaners to just have buttons put on because they do it so much better than I can. So there, we have discussed my sewing skills. So we finally got this red dot done, and I thought, okay, I pricked my finger with a needle, so I literally, blood, sweat, and tears went into this bullet journal setup, and it took a really long time to sort of figure it out. I was working with long thread because the needle was so hard to rethread. I didn't want to have to do that very often. It was a lot of labor that went into this. And while I was doing it, I kept trying to figure out if there was a shortcut, if there was another way that I could have done this that would have made things easier. The only thing I could have done to make this easier, I think, was not attach it to the cardstock and simply use the paper that I had, the decorative paper, to see if that would have made, I know it would have made the process easier, but I'm not sure how sturdy it would have been. There were lots of things to consider that I usually consider way beforehand. As we are getting into the second part of this, into that second black sort of, it kind of looks like that, like when you know, as a kid, when you have the yarn crafts where you wrap the yarn around two sticks and it kind of looks like a kite. I don't know what that's called, but that's what this piece here, the little triangles, or not triangles, they're like, we'll just call them little kites, look like. And they were giving me the blues. It was much harder than the red portion. And as you can see, the back was a mess because sometimes the string would go through and get knotted. I was just going with the flow, and I was like not knowing if this idea, at this point especially, if this idea was working. I had 2 band-aids on my finger because I had pricked myself several times, and I just didn't know if this was going to come together the way that I wanted to. Now, I think that this process would have been a lot simpler had I had a little bit more trial and error beforehand, but we are doing this sort of not live, but we are definitely recording it as the ideas go along. Now, I had originally planned to not glue these strings, but to sew and embroider them on, but ultimately decided that my fingers had had enough. They were very sort of sore and raw from the embroidery part of it, and I thought this might be easier and actually give me a little bit more control. So I am using some glue, and I'm gonna go back in, and I did this off camera, I'm gonna go back in with puff paint to add a little bit more depth to the area around the circle. In the embroidery of the garment, there is sort of a thicker black ring around that sort of comes out almost like a sun. The piece is just really beautiful. I didn't show it on camera because I didn't know if I could, for like copyright reasons. It's not my garment, it's just something that inspired this bullet journal spread. This is a vinyl paper, and this was a godsend because I measured it and then was able to just sort of glue it directly to the paper, and it didn't have much bulk, so it didn't add bulk to the pages of my journal, unlike adding this was going to. Now, it needed to dry, so I waited till the next day to do that. So you'll see there's a couple of pieces that I waited to the next day. So I decided to combine my calendar and my dashboard. I didn't use it much, I think because in the summer I'm not juggling quite as much, so I don't need the dashboard as much. I found that I just haven't been using it, and I figure why take up the space. So I used some paper from my Archer and Olive notebook to put in here to do the blackout pages, and then vinyl on the edges, because the original Archer and Olive notebooks were a little shorter than my Maisie Lane journal. Though I am in an Archer and Olive journal, and it's a little short for an Archer and Olive journal as well. It's great though to be able to tear the paper out. I'm pretty sure that they have adjusted these tear out pages that the notebooks, and that they now, when you tear them out, are big enough to fit in the journal. Just an FYI. We keep my same weeklies. I use the Alistair method, where I have the dates on one side and then a list where I can decide what days I'm going to do all the tasks. That way I don't have to keep writing them. So on one side, I'm just listing events and appointments, and on the other side, I'm listing tasks, and then I'm able to sort of move them around from day to day with just a simple symbol. It is my go-to. I don't think I'll ever change it. I did decide to do these tabs. My pages are a lot smaller than they usually are, but I think I'm going to be okay. I think that there's plenty enough room for me to write my task on the side, though it looks really tiny. I use washi tape throughout to jazz up these pages. You will see me add more washi tape later on, but we are working in my line a day. And if you're new here, my line a day is where I come to write down all the things that I am grateful for, or what's going on in my day, if something didn't go my way. So we are embroidering what I call my little ledges. So this is sort of set up so the artwork, you don't have to do quite as much when you do it this way, when you do these Dutch doors, so you can have one piece of art be used all month long. Now, I started embroidering these and just realized that it just wasn't going to work with this thin paper. I knew I didn't want to get the paper any thicker, so I decided that I was going to go ahead and use puff paint, which has this really sort of glossy quality and is similar and ties into the vinyl. If you're wondering about the vinyl, Schiaparelli is really known for sort of doing these sort of avant-garde things. It's not for the tame, I would say. And so I thought the vinyl really sort of played into the house codes, and wanted to explore a little bit, not be too literal, but also keeping all these things in mind. All these motifs you're seeing me do with the puff paint are motifs that were on the actual garment. I decided to add in these red dots just to add some more color in here. I just basically used a hole punch on this vinyl paper, which has a sticky back, and I peeled it off and placed it onto the setup. These will have to dry, and I'm using a tweezer to post them down so I don't get smudged puff paint on my hands or on these edges. So while that was drying, I went in and started trimming these embroidered pieces for the cover. It really was an involved process, and I actually thought maybe I'll just leave it, but then I was like, no, it needs to be a little bit more manicured and groomed. So I made a mistake on my weeklies when I started stamping in the numbers, and I used a Post-it, a dot grid Post-it that I had recently purchased, not for the purpose of patching up my bullet journal setups, but just to use on a day-to-day basis. And they came in great use here. So if you're looking for something to cover up, those are a good idea. Or you could use a page from the notebooks. So I decided to tape in. This is a double-sided score tape. It's really strong. Rather than using glue, this is much more precise and less messy. It's definitely not coming out after you put it in. So you got to know what you are placing in there beforehand. It really isn't, you really can't go back in and change it afterwards. So this is my mood tracker. I just decided to lean into these shapes. I decided on colors. We're just gonna add a little bit of pattern to these boxes over the month. It'll look like a cool little art piece. All in all, I'm really pleased with how this came together. Though I will say, I prefer to work under a lot less stress. While the process of creating is very enjoyable, when you are taping and creating and hoping that everything comes together, it can be very stressful. All in all, I'm pretty happy with how this came together. I wrestled with whether to put August on this page, but ultimately decided that it was best to sort of just let it live and breathe on its own. This calendar dashboard page is going to be a workhorse page, and I think I'm going to be fine with my shortened weeklies and this dashboard for the month of August. I should have said, but didn't because of all the stress, that August is my birthday month, and I'm always looking to create something that sort of represents me and who I am. I am a fashion girl at heart. We don't talk a lot about that on my bullet journal channel, though I have wrestled with starting a fashion channel and talking about things like the haute couture shows that I follow. But for now, we'll just keep it in the journal. This was really a labor of love, and I was overall just like really, really pleased to have pulled this off. Depending on how much I'm leaning into something that I'm comfortable with and how much I'm doing something new, like this was a very much a new process, and like I said, not a lot of testing to see how things are gonna work out. It depends on how long and how well things come together, but I was pretty determined to make this happen. All right, you made it this far, so put your best fashion emoji in the comments. See you next month.